Hey everybody, Eric Grenier here, and welcome to the 146th episode of the Writ Podcast. It's election season in Newfoundland and Labrador, with voters in the province scheduled to go to the polls on October 14th. To give us a rundown of how this campaign is shaping up, I'm joined today by Amanda Bittner and Sarah Smellie. Amanda is a professor in the Department of Political Science at Memorial University, and Sarah is a reporter with the Canadian Press based in St. John's. Thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
My apologies to listeners, viewers. I'm in the midst of having a cold, so I might sound a bit stuffed up, or I might have some issues during the recording, so my apologies. But I want to get into this election campaign, but before we do that, I feel like we should probably let the audience know, for those of who are outside of Newfoundland and Labrador, how we kind of got here. So Sarah, maybe you can kick us off and set the table for us, because Andrew Furey had been Premier for not that long, and when he announced his resignation at the beginning of the year, it was a bit of a surprise, at least to me. So maybe you can give us the story of what was the story around his departure.
He shocked everyone, honestly. We got a note in our inbox saying there's going to be a press conference. Andrew Furey is going to announce something. It had the air of being something that indeed we should all attend and see what's going on. We showed up. And, none of us expected what happened. And he got up there and said, I'm announcing my intention to resign. He was in office for just over 4.5 years. And yeah, I did write this story earlier on in his tenure where he said, I'm not intending to seek re-election. He said he was on a crusade to fix the finances of the province. So I guess that should have been an indication. But I mean, people were expecting him to actually call an election. There had been rumors that an election was coming for ages, specifically around this big announcement that he had just unveiled, that Hydro-Quebec and Newfoundland and Labrador Hydro had just signed this historic new agreement that would, bring fortunes to both provinces, as they said.
So, Amanda, Andrew Furey departs and hands over the reins to John Hogan, who wins the Liberal leadership race a couple months later. What would you say is either the legacy or the baggage that Andrew Furey left to his successor?
Great question. I mean, he was in office for nearly 5 years. But I'm thinking back to the pandemic election that we had in 2021, 2022. I'm now forgetting when it exactly was. It was in a chaotic time, and that election was extremely poorly managed and led to all kinds of electoral anomalies, including, many court cases that emerged from that, as folks had issues with the fact that people were basically disenfranchised, whether they were, disenfranchised Indigenous groups in Labrador or people disenfranchised here, or even, the high level of ballots that got chucked in that election as well by kind of scrutineers. So one of the legacies really that I had hoped would be a legacy is him tackling this question of electoral management and tackling this question of archaic election laws and so on. But that was not to pass, apparently. In terms of what his legacy is, it's hard to really put a finger on a specific thing that he really was known for or that he really accomplished. It's been a really hard 5 years in this province. Yes, because of COVID, but also because of the state of the economy in general. Nationwide inflation issues, very high housing costs, very high food costs, very high heating costs. None of these things have been fixed by anybody. And so I think folks were surprised that he resigned, as Sarah said, because we have been expecting an election call. And so, and part of that is that federal provincial dynamic where, everybody knew that Poilievre was way ahead in the polls, that Trudeau was way back in the polls. And then we have all this chaos followed by Donald Trump. And then suddenly everything is shifting. And so I think that, the last kind of year in Newfoundland and Labrador politics has been very heightened sense of anxiety, insecurity. A lot of people are really thinking about politics in a way that's really unusual for everybody. Most of us don't think about politics in the way that the three of us do. And yet I think that since January, at least, folks have been really thinking about politics a lot. So here we are, we're in the middle of an election campaign. I think the Liberal Party wants it to be an issue about, it wants this election to be about Churchill Falls, which one, I suppose, could credit to Fury, that he was the premier that, signed on to that original deal. But we don't know the contents of that deal. We don't know what it actually means. Will it actually happen? What are the implications of that deal, and so on. So I think there's just a lot of confusion, let's say, a lot of anxiety in the province, a lot of people wondering, okay, now what? What are the solutions to our really big problems? And so that's kind of the context of where we're at right now. Partly, yes, because of Fury, who has gone back to his old job. The political job's not that easy. I wouldn't want that job right now. Hard job.
Yeah. Well, his resignation came, and then not very long after, Dennis King over in PEI also resigned, largely because, the job wasn't that much fun anymore for him. So, yeah. That's obviously a factor. Sarah, Amanda mentioned it, but for people outside Newfoundland and Labrador and Quebec as well, the Churchill Falls MOU, it's on the placards of the Liberal Party for John Hogan whenever he's making an announcement, no matter what the announcement is. I saw yesterday he had Safer Communities written on it, and then over on top of it in little letters, Churchill Fall MOU. Amanda, what is that? Maybe you can explain the significance of that.
You want me to explain it, or you want Sarah to? Let's get Sarah to explain it. She'll
okay,
do a better
Sarah,
job
go
than
ahead.
I will.
So the Churchill Falls, the MOU, it's been described like it is a non-binding agreement between Hydro-Quebec and Newfoundland and Labrador Hydro about hydroelectric assets on the Churchill River in Labrador. And looming over this thing is this history. So Newfoundland and Labrador Hydro and Hydro-Quebec have been stuck in this contract that was signed in 1969 that basically allows Hydro-Quebec to buy the bulk of the power from the Churchill Falls generating station, which I believe is the second largest in Canada, at very, very low prices, 0.2 cents per kilowatt hour. Newfoundland and Labrador Hydro gets prices at the same amount, but we get a much smaller amount. So Hydro-Quebec has been able to take all this power, pay basically nothing for it, and then sell it at a huge profit. Meanwhile, Newfoundland and Labrador has had some hydro failures. We are not in the position that Hydro-Quebec is, where we can turn around and sell our power for profit. We don't even really have connectivity that we can do that, to sell it to the rest of the country or elsewhere. So that has been a real source of stress and bitterness in this province for a long time. And so this new MOU, everybody calls it the MOU, it would end that deal. It would see Hydro-Quebec pay more for power from the Churchill Falls plant, but it's also like it's a massive agreement. So it has all these different components where they would set up a new payment structure for power for Churchill Falls. They would also expand that plant. They would build a new generating station, and then they'd build a new development at Gull Island. And this is all baked into this one agreement. There's all kinds of different stipulations about how things are going to work. They'd form a new company to run Gull Island, which would have a different ownership structure. And one of the main criticisms that have come forward is just that this thing is so dense and complicated. There are so many different components to it. People don't understand it, and people can't possibly be expected to understand it, given how this thing is written. I've got it right here. And people need more transparency to make an informed decision about it, especially given Newfoundland and Labrador's history with hydroelectric deals gone wrong.
Amanda, do we have any sense of like what people like? Are people in favor of this, or are they against it? Or like what?
Yeah.
We haven't had a poll out of the province in a year, which I've complained about a couple times.
No, it's true. We haven't seen a lot of data. What I would say
is
that everybody wants
sense of
this.
What people think about it.
Everybody wants this to be good. That's the way I would put it. Like everybody is unified on, if this is a good deal, this could be the magic bean I'm going into like the fairy tales with Jack and the Beanstalk. This is the magic bean that will get us, the things that we need, because we have such a small revenue tax base. We have such a high cost per capita for service delivery because our population is small and it's aging and it's hard to do all this stuff. So we had, and our economy is not doing very well. And so we have this situation where we're underfunding healthcare, education, all the provincial jurisdictional mandates. And so we just have all these problems. And so there's no solution. And then all of a sudden, Andrew Furey comes out with this beautiful deal, and it sounds like magic. And so I think that, yes, people are very keen to have this be a good deal, but there's conflicting stories about this. There's been some drama. There's been a resignation from the Independent Review Board, number one. And then there was this like series of battling letters that came out. So prominent former politicians, businessmen, etc., business people, most of them actually are men. People have signed on to these two letters. So one letter comes out saying, this is terrible, we shouldn't sign on. Another letter comes out saying, this is beautiful, we should do it right away. So the average person who respects lots of the people who have signed these letters is just more confused than before. Because why did the guy resign? Why do we not know what happened? What's happening in this Independent Review Board? What are these letters saying and why? And how are we, as regular people who don't know how energy works, because who knows how, it's not our job as voters to have the great details and insights into tough and complex policy documents in the way that we want our elected officials to know what's going on. So for voters, it's like, well, I don't know what to do. This is very confusing. And we're not getting a lot of clarity from the parties, and parties aren't really taking a clear stance on this, but partly because they also don't have the details, right? So John Hogan is saying very clearly, this is the election issue. This is the most important thing that's happening right now. And that sounds nice, because there's actually a lot of challenges that are other election issues as well. So it's convenient for him to say this is the one election issue, because then we can avoid the other stuff that's happening. But I think for the other parties, they're like, well, we don't know if this is a good deal or not. We're not sure. And so we now hear the PCs saying we're going to put it to a referendum. Well, a referendum with zero information is not a good idea. And so how are voters to decide in a referendum without important information that one could get from an independent review board or from additional research, expert perspectives, and so on and so forth? So the whole situation is extremely confusing for voters at a time when economic anxiety is really, really high and the state of the economy is really, really poor and people are suffering. And so, yes, we all want it to be beautiful and for it to work. Will it? I don't know. That's the devil's in the details, like always. And so I think that's what voters are looking for right now, is more details.
I would add too, the PCs have promised to have it independently reviewed. And that came out of the Muskrat Falls inquiry. This is another hydro project that went wrong, is that the judge who led that inquiry in his final report said, big, huge hydro projects that you're taking on, big, huge projects, need to be independently reviewed before you start them.
Okay. Let's maybe take it party by party, just to get a little bit more into the sort of the electoral politics of this campaign. Sarah, you can kick us off with the Liberals. So John Hogan, just in as premier, a couple months into it, not very well known outside Newfoundland and Labrador. I don't know how well he was known inside the province. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about John Hogan and sort of how well prepared the Liberals are for this campaign.
Well, yeah. So John Hogan is 47. He was a lawyer. He has been the Minister of Health, the Minister of Justice, and he was sworn in May after he won the Liberal leadership, after Andrew Furey left. We had horrific fires in Conception Bay North, which is in eastern Newfoundland. It's about an hour and 20-minute drive from here. More than 200 houses and structures were destroyed by these fires. And during that time, Hogan led daily media briefings that were live streamed and broadcast. And there was one poll that came out that showed that his popularity surged quite a bit on the heels of that period. He's still very new, still very untested. He has been traveling around the province. One of the first places he went was Labrador, and his main thing, as we said, he's really touting this MOU. This This is going to bring money into the province. He says this is going to change our fortunes. I mean, his message is that we're going to use it to invest in healthcare and education and do all this. But of course, behind that, we have a massive debt that hasn't really been spoken about very much in this campaign so far.
I know that the Liberals are pretty flush. They have a nice big red bus,
Yeah.
and I saw that Tony Wakeham of the PCs has a nice blue SUV. I'm not sure what Jim Dinn has, but probably not either of those things. But so the Liberals seem to at least have been, setting themselves up for this campaign with, they get lots of money. There's corporate and union donations in Newfoundland and Labrador, unlike most of the country. Amanda, what do you think is the strategy? What are the Liberals? What do you sense is the Liberals' plan to get reelected here?
Yeah, it's a tricky one because I think that they know and others know that it's not a done deal. It's not a guarantee. And so, if we think about the popularity of Poilievre before the federal election this time around, the last couple of years, let's say, that is true here too in Newfoundland and Labrador. And so I think there's a real sense that people are tired of the status quo, have faced many challenges in the last 5 or so years, are feeling quite anxious, are feeling quite worried about the future, and are looking for some kind of change. Whether that change is a change of government or that change is just changes of leaders and policies or something else, it's not clear. But I do think that folks, for the most part, are broadly not happy. So there's not been that many polls done in the province. But the one poll that I saw recently suggested that Newfoundlanders and Labradorians saw healthcare and inflation as the top 2 issues in the province, and like 67% or something like that agreed that we're not heading in the right direction on these issues. And so folks are feeling quite dissatisfied with the status quo. So it's a tough job for John Hogan to sort of say we're going in a new direction. I mean, yes, he is a new leader, but he's been with that party for a long time, and he's a well-known face of that party, not to mention the fact that the party has lost a number of high-profile ministers, long-standing members of the party, members of the caucus, who have decided not to run again. So there is some change certainly happening, but I also think that it's going to be a tough sell in some parts of the province for sure, especially given, issues with the fishery, issues with the costs of heating, issues with all kinds of issues, whether it's rural or urban. I think that across the board, folks are looking for some clarity in terms of what are you going to do now? How are you different? We've had these problems. Yes, you've been there for a while. What have you done? But more importantly, what are you going to do? And so I think that, it's really, he really wants this election to be only about Churchill Falls. And yes, there are other announcements happening along the way, but I think that that's the main kind of selling feature that he's kind of going for. And then trying to sort of distract us, I think, too, on some level from other kinds of issues that are, I think, big issues. So one of the big kind of scandals, let's call it, that's come out of the last little while is over the Education Accord, which was this big process that was undertaken by the government, working with academics at the university here who were seconded to work on this project, 18 months of research, lots of interviews with stakeholders, focus groups, students, teachers, etc., to kind of paint the picture of what's going to happen in the future of education in the province. And it turns out that giant chunks of this document were fabricated by artificial intelligence as opposed to being done with real research. And so this, to me, suggests that government has never taken that process very seriously then, because if you care about what you're doing, you don't just make stuff up. You actually do the job well. And so, nobody wants to talk about that, but that's actually a big deal, because education in our province is not great and needs work and needs more support and needs more resources. And so I think that for a lot of voters, especially voters with kids, people want to know, okay, well, what's happening with this and how are we dealing with it? So I think there's the strategy is Churchill Falls, Churchill Falls, Churchill Falls. Whether that's going to work or not, I don't know. I think certainly there's lots of issues in the province that we're not really talking about, including things like poverty, including things like the cost of living. And I think that those, and including education and healthcare and so on. And I think those are things that voters want to hear more about as well.
Sarah, the Liberals have been in power for 10 years, right? This is the third premier. Dwight Ball won in 2015, and then it was Andrew Furey and now John Hogan. And Ball came in very shortly after Justin Trudeau's victory in 2015. is there a benefit for John Hogan that Mark Carney just won a federal election and did pretty well in Newfoundland and Labrador? He didn't win as many seats. He lost a couple, but in terms of the vote for the federal Liberals, it was a strong result for the party.
I don't know. I mean, I think another thing that we saw in the federal election was that the Conservatives gained quite a lot of ground, particularly in rural Newfoundland. And it could be a challenge for the Liberals to, maintain their seats in rural Newfoundland. One of the things that the Liberals seem to have done to make up for the fact that they did lose a lot of their stalwart members, a lot of, Siobhan Cody, all these people said that they weren't going to run again. They've enlisted a lot of mayors and deputy mayors, people in these areas who were previously on town councils. So they do have people running that the public is familiar with. So we'll see if that pays off for them. But I don't know. I think that the federal election was a shock for a lot of people, and it's hard to tell really what's going to happen and how that will translate.
Yeah, the Conservatives picking up 2 seats in Newfoundland was a bit of a surprise on election night. Let's talk about the PCs then. Sarah, maybe you can give us the Coles notes on the PCs and their campaign as it's shaping up.
Yeah. So the PCs are led by Tony Wakeham, and they are talking a little bit less about the MOU, but Tony Wakeham has been very clear, and it was one of his first announcement was that not only would he have the MOU independently reviewed, but that he would consider having a public referendum about it. The PCs are really campaigning on this idea that after 10 years, things haven't really gotten better and it's time for change. They're making healthcare announcements, public safety announcements, all these kinds of things, and they often take the opportunity in their announcements to point out, like, this is what's failed, this is what we're fixing, this is why it's time for change.
Amanda, the PCs, I noticed when Pierre Poilievre was leading in the polls by 20 points nationwide, you saw some similarities between the kind of the tone and the messaging that the PCs were taking. And then, of course, the Conservatives didn't win the election. So I'm curious, what is the relationship between those two parties at this stage? Because it used to be pretty fraught, obviously, between Danny Williams and Stephen Harper. Are these two parties more or less together now? Are they approaching, is it the same people working on both of these parties?
There's definitely more togetherness than there was in that last era. You're right about that. So I think that, in the Danny Williams, Stephen Harper era, there was a lot done, anybody but Conservatives, to try to separate yourselves from your so-called enemy. And this time around, in the last couple of years, we've seen that that's not true. And I think that's been not true for maybe the last 5 years or so. Even in the last election, I think there was a lot more closeness between federal and provincial level parties. They're still different parties. They don't collaborate quite in the same way that, let's say, the NDP national and provincial do. But I think that ideologically they're closer together. And in terms of image and how they feel and who their voters are, there's a lot more closeness than there once was as well. And I think, actually, that had it not been for Donald Trump, I think that the Conservative Party of Canada would have won more seats in Newfoundland and Labrador. Like, I really think that anxiety over Trump and state sovereignty and, tariff anxiety and everything else really led to people in the province rethinking what they wanted to do and refinding some solace in Mark Carney. So this is why I say I think that it's quite possible that we're going to see a larger number of PCs winning in this election than 5 years ago, because of that sense of, we're not happy, as Sarah said, we're not happy with the last 5-10 years. We still have all these problems. Let's have some change and let's fix some of these problems. So I really do think that the election could go in either direction, and it could be a majority, it could be a minority, it could be a majority for either of the two main parties, it could be a minority. So there's a lot up in the air right now, and people, I think, are broadly satisfied with the job John Hogan has done so far. But as Sarah said, it's been a lot of like wildfire stuff, and I think that all the underlying non-wildfire anxiety is still there, and so I really think that this election is anyone's to win and anyone's to lose. Yeah.
Amanda, for the PCs, just is their electorate changing? Because in the past, they used to do very well in St. John's, and we saw some by-elections over last year where the PCs just soared in some areas where the Liberals had previously been strong. We saw that the Conservatives won off the Avalon Peninsula, when in the past they would usually win in and around St. John. So, Amanda, is the PC electorate that it used to be able to count it, has it shifted? Is it shifting right now?
Great question. I mean, I think on one level, conservative voters have always been here, and the party historically has done well in all parts of the province, depending on the year and so on. And I think that the kind of nationwide economic anxiety that we're seeing is certainly affecting voters right now here too. And so, yes, I think there's a lot of people in the province who are not happy with the Liberal government in the province and who want a change. And for them, that change is the PC party. For others, the change involves, let's say, the NDP or something else. And so I think that that question about, wanting change and what that change is going to look like, I think that'll be interesting to see on election day. Because I really do think that, yes, absolutely across the province, people will vote for Conservative Party and people will vote for the Liberal Party across the province. And so it's just a matter of I think, getting those votes out. And so one of the challenges will be for all the parties is turnout. Because of that election fatigue, this will be our third election this year, including all three levels of government. And right now we're in the middle of a municipal and a provincial election at the same time. People are exhausted. People are confused. People are tired of people knocking on their doors. There's so many pamphlets in my mailbox in my house, for example, that I leave them there and they just keep coming. And so I think that a lot of folks, and I love politics, so I'm unusual. And still I'm like, oh gosh, I'm a little tired right now. So I get the fatigue. And so I think that mobilization piece is going to be key as well.
Sarah, Amanda mentioned the NDP. They are running a full slate for the first time in a decade. What's the NDP's status heading into this election?
The NDP's status right now, when the election was called, they had one member, which was one member in the government, which is their leader, Jim Dinn. They are running Sheila O'Leary. So Sheila O'Leary was the deputy mayor of the city of St. John's for quite a while. She's very well known. She likely has a good chance of perhaps gaining them another seat. But the NDP, they are one member at this point. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean the party's always had some struggle, and they do. Yeah, I've seen Jim Dinn.
Had an NDP government here in Newfoundland. I think we are one of the few provinces that have never had an NDP government.
Yeah, and the party topped out in 2011. It had, I think, 5 seats or 5 or 6 seats or something like that. But seeing Jim Dinn spending most of his time in St. John's, he went to Labrador. Those seem to be the two kind of areas where the NDP has a shot. But Amanda, there's other candidates on the ballot. There's a couple independents that are running for re-election, and there's also one independent running in 2 ridings, or 2 districts. Maybe you can tell us that story.
I do love this story. As a nerd, this one is exciting for me on a very, very nerdy level only, which is quite a level. So Alison Coffin, who is the former leader of the NDP, and she lost her election in the 2021 pandemic election. This was that controversial election I spoke of kind of behind the scenes earlier in terms of pandemic election management, and that's a whole other topic for a different day. So she is running. She's announced that she's running as an independent in 2 seats at the same, and for 2 ridings at the same time, both about let's say an hour from St. John's. So this is highly unusual. We haven't seen anybody running in more than 1 riding in over a century, I would say. And it has happened rarely in the past. So what she's saying is that she's doing this to highlight the fact that our elections legislation needs revamping. And so she wants to see some electoral reform. And after the last election where she launched a series of court cases and really raised issues with the way that the election was managed last time, I had anticipated that the government would initiate some kind of initiative to review and revise the legislation surrounding our Elections Act, but that did not happen. So she's found this loophole. There's nothing that prohibits a person from running in more than 1 riding. So she's doing it. And will she win in both? I mean, I don't know. historically in other parts of the country, when there have been people running in more than one riding, if they win, they then are told they have to choose. They can only actually then hold a seat in one seat, not two seats. I mean, the job is a hard job. We've talked about that already. I don't see how you would do two jobs. That'd be too much. But it is interesting, from the kind of academic standpoint, to find this loophole and to push at it. It's almost like scratching a scab, like we have this problem. Our elections law needs to be revamped. We need to take elections seriously. And she's pointing out the ways that we don't. And I really appreciate that as an academic. I'm like, yes, you go. Maybe this will shed the light that we need on the Elections Act again and have somebody take it seriously. So will it work? Who knows? But I really appreciate this valiant effort to point to problems in the legislation. I think that's great.
Yeah, it used to be relatively common for some candidates to run in multiple districts. We saw that particularly for party leaders like John A. Macdonald and Wilfrid Laurier did it.
But that's like 200 years ago. This is not now.
It's been a minute, right? Like most of the provinces and federally have just added a line saying you can only run in one riding. Which would seem to be an easy fix to do after this election. We'll see if they do it, but it's just not anywhere in the election law, and it's kind of amazing to see that oversight there. So we'll just finish on this. We can hear from both of you. Sarah, you can start us. There's 2 weeks left in this campaign, more or less. We're at the halfway point. What are you looking for in these last 2 weeks? What are you going to be focusing on?
What I'm focusing on, I mean, one of the things, it happens all the time, and we do have a very large debt here in Newfoundland and Labrador, and there hasn't been a lot of discussion about it. Of course not. Electors don't want to talk about debt. They don't. And an election time is a time to make promises and tell everybody that things are great or will be great under their government. But it has been interesting to see how little airtime the debt has received in party platforms. I will be really interested to see, I mean, some of the districts that I'm really curious about. There's one, Cape St. Francis, which is just near St. John's, just north. They have been PC for more than 60 years. And in that district, the Liberals have a woman running who was a member of a local town council, and they had her lead the campaign launch. And she got up there and she said, "I'm going to be the first Liberal to sit in this district." So I'm really curious to see if she will actually be successful. Yeah, and I feel the same way as Amanda. Like I think that it's really hard to call this election. I was standing around with a bunch of journalists the other day. Mark Carney was in town, and everybody had a different take on what they thought the outcome was going to be. So it'll be something.
I'm curious to see if there'll be a poll out. I've never covered an election before without a single poll. So this would be something if we don't see one before the last 2 weeks. I don't want to put either of you on the spot. Is there a debate? I didn't see anything. Is there anything scheduled right now?
I know that there's usually an education-focused debate. So I believe the NL Teachers Union is putting one on maybe next week. I'm not sure which day. But I haven't seen anything other than that.
I'm just curious. Because I usually see at least some sort of news about a debate coming up, so they got to get the act together, get one going. Amanda, what are you going to be looking for in the last phase of this campaign?
So one of the things that interests me, and I think it's because I spend so much of my time on the university campus, is thinking about youth and thinking about the challenges that they face right now, because it's really hard to be a student today compared to when I was a student back in the day. So if you think about the cost of living, a lot of our students are working 3 jobs just to feed themselves. The cost of food is super high. Campus food bank usage is out of control. They can't find homes. Rents are out of control. There's a lot of really big challenges that the province is facing that are particular to younger people. And so what I see in students these days, if you add in climate change, wildfires, the fact that many of them, even if they finish their degrees, won't be able to buy a house for decades, if ever, there's a lot of really kind of it's a tough time just to exist at the moment. And so I want to see parties talk about that and acknowledge that. Youth unemployment rates this year were higher than they've ever been. So many high schoolers can't get jobs. Like these kinds of strange things that are coming of age experiences, that don't lead to great feelings as an adult and don't lead to a lot of hope as well. And then you combine that with, the other problems we've talked about, poverty, cost of living, homelessness, and then, for example, gender-based violence rates, which have gone up a lot since the pandemic, and they were already high. So times are tough for a lot of people, and I'd like to see parties address that clearly and talk about that seriously and propose solutions, because some of these solutions, there are solutions to these problems, but we're not hearing about them. And I think that for a lot of people who are having a really hard time these days, and that's a lot of people and it's a growing number, I think that it would be great if parties talked to them and focused on their needs, because, in a democracy, you want to make sure that you're not forgetting the people who are struggling the most. And I'm not seeing a lot of that talk happening. And I just, for students in particular, I see there's a lot of people are really struggling with the basics, and that's not cool. And they're students, and so therefore they're going to continue to struggle in the future. And so what is the plan for making things better in the future for people in this province? It's not obvious yet.
All right. Well, we'll see what the party messaging will be over the last couple weeks. We'll see where the leaders go. That's usually a good indication of where they think the election will be decided, and it'll be. And if we don't get a poll, it'll be a very interesting night, especially if because I won't ask either of you for predictions, because it does seem like
I hate that.
Yeah, I won't do that. Don't worry about it.
I don't want to be wrong.
All right. Well, I'm very curious to see what that result will be on October 14th. And I thanks to both of you for taking some time to join me. I know it's a busy time in an election campaign. So thanks very much. And if you're watching, listening in Newfoundland and Labrador, make sure to go out and vote on October 14th. So thanks a lot for joining me.
Thank you.